Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, since the age of 9, American-Nigerian Zuriel Oduwole has been recognized as an international activist, meeting and advising dozens of world leaders, presidents and prime ministers, and taking part in several high-profile United Nations programs. Today, at 19, she's the co-founder of an NGO fighting for equal access to education for girls and ending child marriage around the world. She's made several award-winning video documentaries, is included by Elle Fashion magazine among 33 women who changed the world, and she's been honored by the US Secretary of State for her educational advocacy work in Africa, Europe, and the Americas. And now, as she continues to use her voice to promote the rights of other young people, she's setting out her new vision in the Middle East, launching her new revolutionary education idea in Qatar.
You inspired me as well.
One of the things that my Dususu Foundation actually focuses on is alternative education. Now, when you go into a classroom or go into school, you're learning the basic typical subjects. You have math, history, English, science, and all those types of things. But with alternative education, you're learning skills that you wouldn't necessarily learn in school, but they're skills that you can use to empower yourself through employment or through opportunities. And when I was 13, I started a basic filmmaking workshop. So this was back in 2016. I started it in Namibia, and basically as a filmmaker myself, I was self-taught. So I had to learn how to manage a camera, how to edit, how to do voiceovers, and because I was able to do it, I was convinced that others could also learn this skill without having to wait until university level or waiting until film school. So I started this workshop in 2016, and then just 9 months after that first class, one of the students, and this is a class mostly of unemployed or out-of-school girls, one of the students, she went out, she borrowed a camera, and she went around her neighborhood and her community and made her first full-length documentary, which was incredible, and she got to shop it around to TV networks in her area as well, which was amazing. And from this success story, I've now done this workshop for over 480 students now in countries like Ethiopia, Nigeria. I've also done it in Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Mexico as well. So that's alternative education.
Amazing young woman, and I'm delighted to say that Zuriel Oduwole joins me now on the line from California. Zuriel, absolutely delighted to see you. Happy New Year. I hope you had a good break. I have to say that I'm always amazed at how much you've done and continue to do as an education activist, girls' rights advocate at just 19. I mean, we'll look back at your remarkable career in just a moment. But first of all, we saw that video there, that you've been turning your attention recently to the Middle East, and you've got a new educational advocacy initiative. Tell us more about that.
I will. Thank you so much, Mr. Charles. It's so good to see you again. I think it's been like a year or like a year and a half, somewhere around there, since we last spoke. I always look forward to being on the program. So yeah, this is something that I've started talking about recently. Alternative education, you heard it there in the clip. And this started when I was invited to speak at the Y Summit in Doha, Qatar. It's this global education conference. And I was invited to lend my voice to issues of girls' education and finding ways to solve the issue of out-of-school children, find ways to get them back into school. And so with alternative education, the reason why I came up with this is because I'm sure over the last couple of decades, if we think about it, we've seen so many global reports, so many regional reports from UNICEF and other such bodies saying how there's some 250 million children out of school worldwide. And this has been going on for a while, and the numbers haven't really changed that much. So what I thought it was, if we change the metric that we use, and by that I mean how we measure where children are in their cognitive development, then maybe this number can begin to change. And the reason why I talk about this is because I think we should be focusing more on the number of children who aren't educated as opposed to the number of children who are not in school. And I say this because there are some communities around the world, some regions, some countries where children don't even have access to a school. There's no shade for an outside classroom. There's barely a roof over a wall to even form a classroom, let alone a school. So how can we tell kids to go to school if there is no school? And then there are some times where these kids, to get to their school, they have to walk 8, 10, 12 miles hungry, and despite the weather conditions, it can be extremely hot, it can be rainy, they still have to go and get to school. And by the time that they do, they're exhausted. And so I talk about this idea of alternative education, because I think that if we focus more on educating children, instead of just telling them and trying to get them into schools, then we can see a reduction in this global number of out-of-school children. That's one of the things that I talked about at the WISE Summit that you saw in the clip. One of the things that my foundation does is we run a filmmaking workshop. And we do this because filmmaking is teaching these out-of-school girls and unemployed youth a skill that they can use to go out and empower themselves. They can empower themselves through employment opportunities. And with filmmaking, they can also use it to tell their own stories as well as their community stories. And there's so many different avenues for alternative education. I chose filmmaking, but there's other avenues like coding, entrepreneurship, so many different ways that we can use alternative education and shift our focus towards this and provide this alternative education curriculum. So that way many more around the world will have a chance and an opportunity to get that education. And then also we'll see a reduction in this 250 million number of out-of-school children that hasn't changed the last couple of years.
Well, I have to say, listening to you, it makes a lot of sense. You were, of course, invited by the Qatar Foundation to share this new initiative at their biannual WISE Summit. You had a series of speaking sessions there. I mean, what was the reaction to your idea? How did it go, broadly speaking?
Yeah, so when I went to go and present this idea, there was a bunch of different things I was talking about at the event, all revolving around girls' education. And when I brought up this topic of alternative education, I know after the event, people came up to me and they were like, we never thought about it that way before. We're so focused on trying to get them into schools, and school's not a bad thing, but we have to think about areas where it's not even possible to get kids into school. And we can't just leave them and say, well, we can't do anything in that area. We have to still find ways to educate them. And so they were all surprised when they came up to me to talk about this issue of alternative education. They wanted to know more. They wanted to find out ways that this could be a large scale thing. I learned so many things in Qatar. One of the things that I learned is this idea. I call it a serious disconnect. And this is why alternative education can be very important. So whenever in the past few decades, I'm sure Mr. Charles, you agree with me, whenever we hear about the issues of girls' education, out-of-school girls, it's almost always adults that are talking about it or that are driving it and campaigning for it. We hardly see teenagers or young girls doing it. But what I found out is that this creates an agenda disconnect. The reason being, in many global settings, most of which are dominated by men, they're seeing women in their 40s, in their 50s, sometimes maybe even in their 60s, talking about the reason why girls should be able to go to school. And so it doesn't always click. I mean, it'd be like if you had a group of primary school children, if you had them outside of a bank and they were advocating for better pay for the workers that were inside. It's a disconnect, right? Or if you had Ugandans, for example, advocating for the welfare of the elderly in Japan, it's a disconnect. But if you imagine, and this is going back to the issue of girls' education now, if you have a teenager or a young girl fighting for the rights for girls to be able to go back to school on the global stage, then that's different. It's more powerful, it's more believable, and the issue becomes better aligned with the advocate. And that's what I've been doing these past few years of my incredible girls' education advocacy journey these past 9 years. I've been making the case for the reason why girls should be able to go to school. And also now I've been pushing this idea of alternative education. I mean, an example of how I've seen this is a few years ago, I think back in 2018, I met with President Felipe Nyusi of Mozambique. I met him in Maputo when I was 16. And just like with the other world leaders, I was lending my voice to the issue of girls' education. I was showing myself as an example of what an educated girl can do. And I was also adding my voice strongly to the issue of girl marriage in this country. And I talked about how it robs girls of the future that they have. And so I spent time talking about this. And at the end of this meeting, I asked a very simple question, single question. Do you not want all the girls in your country to be educated like me so that they can do even better things? And he was quiet. But then guess what? 16 months after that first meeting with him, so this is now June of 2019, and with the help of many other voices, Mozambique formally and finally outlawed child marriage after over 100 years of practice. And so this is what I mean by fixing that disconnect. And through what I've been doing of alternative education, teaching young girls how to make films, they can now use this as well to tell their own stories and bring awareness to the issues that they see in their own communities, that they see in their lives. So that way it's them themselves advocating for the issues that they're facing. And I feel like that has a more powerful effect. What do you think about that though, Mr. Charles?
Well, I mean, I have to say, just listening to you from here, I'm absolutely entranced, not just by your capacity to communicate and communicate so confidently, but by the logic of your argument and how linear it all is. And I mean, obviously being an international activist and a global girls' education advocate, whilst also being a student, I mean, that's not an easy combination of tasks, because, I mean, in addition to all that, you also advise governments on education policy. And I suppose the audience, people who are watching you now, must be curious about how you manage all that.
Well, first, I appreciate the kind words, Mr. Charles. Honestly, I've been doing all this since I was 9. And part of what's helped me with balancing all these things is that I was homeschooled most of my life. And another thing I've been talking about, I mentioned it in Qatar as well, in addition to alternative education, is this idea of e-learning. Because with e-learning, as long as there's internet access, and internet access is getting more and more readily available nowadays, then more children can have access to school and have access to an education. And then obviously this can be so easily tied in to alternative education curriculums. So online education has helped me balance all these different things. My family's been a great support system as well. But I think honestly, the biggest thing is, for me, I have a passion and I have a drive. And I really, truly want to see a difference in the lives of children, but especially girls around the world. And I want to see them getting more of a chance and opportunity to go to school and get that education. So I feel like that has also driven me and empowered me to continue the work that I'm doing while as a student, while as a sibling, while as a daughter, and all these different things.
Well, I have to say that I'm inspired by what you're doing and by what you're saying. And we're going to come back in a minute, so stay with us. We want to talk a little bit about your Dususu Awards. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the high-profile teenage activist and girls' education advocate, Zuriel Oduwole, co-founder of the Dususu Foundation. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now, since the age of 9, Zuriel Oduwole has been an international activist, meeting dozens of world leaders and advising them on everything from education for girls to ending child marriage around the world. Today, at just 19, in addition to being recognized as a seasoned diplomat, filmmaker, and global influencer in Africa, Europe, and the Americas, and now the Middle East, she's also doing many other things. One of them is her annual Dususu Awards, which recognizes the measurable work of African First Ladies and African gender ministers in the area of gender development and girls' education. The recognition is spurring them competitively to do even more. And the high-profile teenage activist, girls' education advocate, Zuriel Oduwole, co-founder of the Dususu Foundation, is still with me on the line from California. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. Now, you've got this initiative we were just talking about a minute ago for First Ladies and gender ministers in Africa, through which you hope to encourage them to do more for girls' education and gender development. And there's an annual award that goes with that initiative. Perhaps you could tell us more about that.
Of course. So sure, Mr. Charles, you know me, I always see things differently. And one of the things that I've noticed through my various travels across the African continent to about 14 countries now, is that the presidents and prime ministers, about 96% of which are men on the African continent, they're not the only ones who can play a role and have an effect on the well-being of young girls and young women in their countries. But what tends to happen is that they alone get the credit whenever a positive gender development report comes out of the country. But I realized the strong role that first ladies and sometimes gender ministers can also play. And so that's basically how this all started. I took that and we began researching. We began gathering data, tapping in to world reports, getting volunteers to verify information, speaking to children. So that way we could evaluate and determine the effect that first ladies and gender ministers have in this area. And so that's how we started the Dususu Awards. We started it in 2014. I was 11 at the time. I remember our first award was presented to the First Lady of Tanzania, Mrs. Selma Kikwete. A year later, our 2015 award was presented to First Lady Margaret Kenyatta of Kenya. Our 2016 edition of the award was given to First Lady of Namibia, Mrs. Monica Gengos. Then our 2017 award went to First Lady Mariam Faisal of Senegal. In 2018, the recipient of the award was the First Lady of Mozambique, Mrs. Isara Nyusi. In 2019, First Lady Ligia Canseco of Cabo Verde got the award. And then in 2020, the award was presented to First Lady of Sierra Leone, Mrs. Fatima Bio. And now you might not have been expecting this, but honestly, right now, I'm really honored to be able to announce our 2021 recipients of the Dususu Award for the First Ladies category. And this is the first time that this has ever happened. A First Lady who's won the award before has won it again this year. The award's being presented to First Lady Monica Gengos of Namibia. She's been notified and is very delighted. I'm really excited about this. And then for the Gender Minister category, our 2021 award is going to Mrs. Sadia Farouk out of the Humanitarian Ministry in Nigeria. So these are the two who are receiving the 2021 Dususu Awards. For those who might be wondering why they were chosen, I actually have the citations here from the awards committee in our foundation, stating the reasons why. For First Lady, here we go. First Lady Monica Gengos, the reason why she's receiving the award is because of her understanding of the needs of her country's young women and girls within the current global health emergency period, as well as her ability to galvanize a broader community support and her continuous and clear fight for girls' education and their welfare within and outside the parameters of her role as First Lady with little resources. Her work has been exemplary. And then for Minister Sadia Farouk, she is receiving the award because she demonstrated a comprehensive understanding of the scope of humanitarian affairs, as well as shown a clear support for girls' education and their welfare, and has been balancing the needs of displaced citizens in resettlement within a functional social development boundary. Her work too has been exemplary. So I'm really, really excited to be presenting both of these awards later on next month to these amazing women. And honestly, all of this just comes back to what I've been talking about of girls' education and the importance of getting a good education. I mean, if I wasn't allowed to go to school, if I didn't get an education, then how would I be able to do all these different projects that I've been blessed to do? How would I have been able to try and make the little difference that I'm trying to across the globe through all these various projects across 19 countries so far? So honestly, education is so, so important. And with these Dususu Awards, honestly, the goal is to first acknowledge and recognize those who are doing a lot in the area of girls' education and gender development in their countries, and also to support more First Ladies and more gender ministers to continue doing such amazing work.
And there you have it, folks. Exclusively on Arise News, the Dususu Awards for 2021. We love exclusive moments here on Arise, and we thank you, Zuriel, for agreeing to share with us exclusively here on Arise News the Dususu awardees for 2021. And of course, I understand that this Dususu Award has become sort of much sought after by African First Ladies. I was reading somewhere that at their last meetings in New York and Addis Ababa, I mean, those who received it apparently bragged about it. So it's become a sort of marker and a way for First Ladies to assess progress in the gender work that they do.
Well, honestly, I hope it is. I hope that more look at this and continue to do work in the issue of girls' education. With those who've won the award so far, they've done amazing work. I believe and hope that they'll continue to do so. And hopefully, as well as all the new recipients as well, we'll see a lot more first ladies and gender ministers doing a lot for the girls in their country.
And just we've got a couple of minutes or so before we have to end the chat. Beyond obviously continuing with your education and your advocacy work, I mean, I know you are an ideas person and an action person. What else have you been dreaming up? I mean, what's on the cards for 2022?
Oh, Mr. Charles, I got to keep some of that under wraps. But definitely with my Dususu Foundation, we're planning a few more education projects for the year. The biggest thing that I focus on, this as well as girls' education. So each new year, I sit down, I plan with my foundation, we look at things that can be done throughout the year. And right now, I think we're Jan 6th, so we have a lot of meat left in the year, and hopefully we'll get a lot of things done.
And I want to say thank you very much indeed, Zuriel, for sharing this time with us, and of course sharing that exclusive moment with us as well. Zuriel Oduwole talking to me there from California. That's it for this edition of The Arise Interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and around the world, bye-bye and thank you for watching.